The wind screamed through Widow's Pass like a wounded animal, tearing across the narrow trail that snaked between towering pines and sheer rock faces. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, turning the world into nothing but white noise and cold. Jesse Dalton hunched forward in the saddle, one gloved hand gripping the reins, the other holding his coat collar tight against his neck. His horse, an old mare named Dust, picked her way carefully through the drifts, ears pinned back against the storm. Behind him, wrapped in a wool blanket and strapped securely to the saddle, 8-year-old Tommy fought to keep his eyes open, his small face buried in his father's back, arms locked around Jesse's waist. The boy hadn't complained once. Not about the cold, not about the long ride home from Stillwater. He knew better. Winter in Red Bluff territory didn't care about complaints. Jesse had spent 14 hours at Harlow's stable shoeing horses and mending broken wagon axles for travelers passing through. His hands still ached from the work, knuckles cracked and raw despite the leather gloves. The pay wasn't much, but it kept food on the table and firewood stacked by the cabin door. That was enough. It had to be. They were less than 3 miles from home when Jesse saw it. A dark shape slumped against the base of a wind-twisted pine just off the trail. At first, he thought it was a fallen branch, or maybe a deer carcass left by wolves. But as dusk drew closer, the shape took form, an ebony black horse, legs folded beneath it, head drooping low, and beside it, half buried in the snow, a figure in a long coat. Jesse reined Dust to a halt, his gut tightening. "Stay put, Tommy," he said quietly, swinging down from the saddle. The boy nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around his small body. Jesse approached slowly, boots crunching through the snow as he moved toward the strange figure. The woman was lying face down, her long coat matted with snow and blood. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale visible in the cold, the fog of life escaping her body with every breath. Jesse's eyes scanned the area. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken branches or footprints. She was simply there. The horse, meanwhile, was in no better shape. Its body sagged, one side pressed against the trunk of the tree as though it had collapsed in exhaustion. The black stallion was a beauty, though, with a glossy coat still glistening in the fading light. The sight of it hit Jesse's gut harder than he expected. It was a sign of something more, something that didn't belong on the cold, empty trail. Kneeling beside her, Jesse gently touched the woman's shoulder. His breath caught in his throat when she didn't stir, the snow already beginning to settle over her like a blanket, as if trying to claim her as its own. Jesse's heart raced. He'd seen death before, working in the stables, living through winters that stripped the soul warmth. But there was something different about this woman. Maybe it was the way she was so carefully left here, in this place. Or maybe it was a quiet desperation that clung to her, like an invisible chain, linking her to something much larger than herself. "Hey," he murmured, his voice hoarse against the wind. He shook her lightly, hoping for some sign of life. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. The woman's breath was shallow, nearly imperceptible. Jesse quickly checked for a pulse, his fingers trembling against her icy skin. A faint pulse. Thank God. He exhaled, pushing her to one side and then shifting her weight onto his knee. He'd heard of people being pulled from the snow, only to survive if they were thawed out quick enough. But there was no way to do that here, in this godforsaken weather. The wind howled around him, the storm relentless. Jesse thought about leaving her, about riding on. But something deep inside made him stay. He pulled her gently onto his back, cradling her with care, holding her steady as he mounted Dust. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered to Tommy, who was still huddled in the blanket, unaware of the woman's presence. "We'll be home soon." As Dust moved forward, Jesse's mind raced. He knew he couldn't leave her out there. But what did he expect to do with her? He had no idea who she was. The woman's face was pale, streaked with snow, but her features were delicate, almost angelic, despite the dirt and grime. Jesse's thoughts kept turning, wondering who would be missing her. Who would send someone to look for her? He shook his head. These thoughts were a distraction, and he needed a focus. He had his family to worry about. He couldn't get caught up in something that might bring trouble to them. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had worsened. Snow drifted in front of the porch, piling high against the door. Jesse struggled to dismount, supporting the woman's weight as he lifted her into his arms. He heard Tommy stir behind him. "Pa!" Tommy asked, his voice small and fearful. "It's all right," Jesse reassured him, voice soft. "Just stay inside. I'll bring her in." The warmth of the cabin hit him like a wall when he stepped through the door. It was a small place, but it was home. A crackling fire burned in the hearth, and the smell of simmering stew filled the air. Jesse didn't want to disturb their peace, but the woman in his arms wasn't going to survive much longer if he didn't get her warm. He laid her on the couch by the fire, removing her boots and gloves carefully. The firelight flickered across her face, and Jesse saw the faintest traces of bruising around her neck. She'd been through something more than just being left out in the snow. But what? Jesse couldn't explain why he felt compelled to help her. Maybe it was the way she looked. Helpless, broken in a way that mirrored his own struggles. Maybe it was the fact that no one else would have helped. But for whatever reason, he was now committed. He went to the stove to prepare a warm drink, hoping the woman would stir. His mind raced with questions, but no answers came. Who was she? Why had she been left for dead? And most importantly, what did he do now? The sound of a faint cough brought him back to the present. The woman's eyelids fluttered open, revealing a pair of glassy blue eyes. She didn't speak, only looked at him with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Easy," Jesse said softly, bending over her. "You're safe now. You're all right." Her lips moved, but no words came. She was too weak to speak, and her breath was labored. Jesse felt a pang of guilt. This was no simple rescue. She was in danger, and so was his family. As the fire crackled, casting long shadows across the room, Jesse stared at the woman, his mind battling with thoughts of loyalty and survival. He had no idea who she was, but he couldn't abandon her now. Something told him that saving her was only the beginning of a much larger journey. Tommy, still clutching his blanket, moved closer, peeking at the woman from behind the doorway. "Pa, who is she?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. Jesse's heart sank. How could he explain this? How could he explain that the woman who lay on their couch, frozen and near death, was now the center of his world? "I don't know yet, son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we'll find out soon enough." Jesse awoke to the soft crackle of the fire, its warmth casting long shadows across the cabin. The storm had raged through the night, but it was quieter now, the wind's howl replaced by the steady hiss of snow as it settled against the walls. He glanced over at the couch where the woman lay. Her breath had steadied overnight, and though she still appeared pale, the color was slowly returning to her cheeks. Jesse had done his best to keep her warm, piling blankets over her fragile form, but her recovery would take more than just heat. She needed food, strength, and time. Tommy was already awake, sitting by the fire, his wide eyes fixed on the woman with quiet curiosity. Jesse couldn't blame him. He felt the same way. Who was she? Why had she been out there in the storm? Why did she look like someone who had been through more than the cold? "Pa!" Tommy whispered, not taking his eyes off her. "Is she going to be all right?" Jesse nodded, his mind elsewhere. "I think so. Just needs to rest." Tommy's small hands fidgeted nervously. What if she doesn't wake up? Jesse didn't answer immediately. His son's fears mirrored his own. What if they couldn't help her? What if the storm had taken its toll on her too completely? He had no answers, just a quiet hope that somehow she'd make it. He rubbed his face and stood, walking over the fire. The warmth from the flames felt good against the chill that had settled in his bones. Jesse hadn't slept much, his thoughts drifting back to the night before. What had driven him to help this stranger? To pull her from the snow without a second thought? There was no logical explanation. He didn't know her. She wasn't family. But something in her fragile, defeated state had struck a chord in him. The storm had passed, but Jesse felt an unease settle in the pit of his stomach. He brought the woman into their home, and now he couldn't simply walk away. There was something about her that felt unfinished, like an unsolved mystery he was tied to. Suddenly, a faint groan from the couch broke his thoughts. He turned sharply, finding her stirring. Marissa, as he'd learned she was called, opened her eyes slowly, squinting against the light. Her gaze locked onto Jesse, and for a moment there was a flash of recognition in her eyes. Then it faded as quickly as it came. "Where am I?" she asked in a hoarse voice, barely above a whisper. Jesse hesitated before responding. "You're safe now. You've been here for the last day. You were unconscious when I found you." Marissa's brow furrowed, her fingers twitching as if searching for something. "The storm, the horse." Her voice trailed off, and she looked around the room as if trying to piece the events together. "Where's my horse?" Jesse glanced toward the door, where the snow had piled up thickly outside. "Your horse didn't make it. I'm sorry." Marissa's face paled again, her lips parting as if she might speak, but she stopped herself. Her eyes closed briefly, and Jesse saw the brief flash of pain cross her features. She was processing something deep, something more than just her physical injury. Jesse sat on the edge of the couch, closer now, but still keeping his distance. "We'll get you back on your feet," he said quietly. "But first, I need to know who you are. What happened? How did you end up out there?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her gaze to the fire, her fingers tracing the blanket around her. For a long moment, Jesse thought she might fall asleep again, retreating into her silence. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Marissa," she began, her words slow, each one seemingly weighed down with a burden she wasn't ready to share. Marissa Walker. Jesse's brow furrowed at the name. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Walker? What does that mean? Who are you?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Jesse saw a flicker of something like fear, or maybe it was just vulnerability. "I'm the owner of the largest cattle empire in this territory, the Walker Ranch. My family's been running it for generations." Jesse felt a jolt in his chest, though he didn't show it. Walker Ranch. Of course. Everyone in the territory had heard of it, heard of her family's wealth, their land, and their influence. The Walkers were the backbone of the cattle trade, their ranch stretching across hundreds of miles, their name synonymous with power. To be a Walker meant you were someone important, someone untouchable. And yet, here she was, broken, stranded in the snow, with no explanation, no answers for why she'd been alone, no explanations for the emptiness in her eyes. "How did you get out there?" Jesse asked, his voice soft but persistent. Marissa looked away, her fingers clenching at the blanket in a way that seemed too tight. "I don't remember. I was forced to leave. My family," she cut herself off, as if afraid to continue. She shook her head, like she was trying to shake the past out her mind. "There was a fire, a loss. People came for the land. I don't know how it happened, but I was left behind." Jesse remained silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the room. He could see the turmoil in her face, the confusion, the loss. But there was something else there, too, something Jesse couldn't quite place. A hardened edge beneath the fragile exterior. "Who left you?" Jesse asked gently. "Who would do that?" "I don't know," Marissa replied quietly. "But they'll be looking for me. They'll know I'm alive soon enough." Jesse stood, pacing the room, his mind racing. Whoever had done this to her was dangerous. And now, with her family's empire in jeopardy, she was bound to have enemies, more than just the cold of the wilderness. He returned to the fire, trying to steady himself. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice steady but unsure. Marissa looked at him for a long moment, her gaze sharp despite her frailty. "I need you to help me get back my ranch," she said quietly. "It's the only thing I have left." Jesse's heart skipped a beat. "Your ranch? I don't know how to help you with that." She sat up slowly, her strength returning in small doses. "You don't have to know how, but I need someone to help me fight." Her words hit Jesse harder than he'd expected. He had a family, a life in Red Bluff. The idea of getting involved in someone else's war was terrifying. But her plea, the desperation in her voice, left him no room to turn away. "I can't promise anything," Jesse said, his voice quieter now. "But I'll help you." Marissa nodded, her eyes softening for the first time. "Thank you." The days that followed were a blur of frostbitten mornings and long, cold nights. Marissa's recovery was slow but steady. With every passing day, the fire inside her grew stronger, though it was tempered by the shadow of fear that clung to her. Jesse could see in the way she moved, cautious, measured, as though every step was a risk. Her haunted eyes, though soft with gratitude at times, often looked as if they were searching for something that didn't exist. Jesse's life, already a struggle for survival in the harsh world of Red Bluff, was now irrevocably tangled with hers. He had no choice but to help her. He had already made that decision the moment he pulled her from the snow. But as he helped her piece together the broken fragments of her empire, the deeper he sank into her world, the more he realized how far he had fallen into a game he didn't understand. One morning, after the storm had finally subsided, Marissa stood at the window, gazing out the expanse of snow-covered fields that stretched toward the distant mountains. Her eyes were narrowed, calculating, as if she was seeing a future that Jesse could not yet fathom. "We leave tomorrow," Marissa said abruptly, without turning toward him. Jesse, sitting at the table, paused. His hand hovered over his coffee mug. "Leave? Where?" "To town," she replied, finally turned to face him. "I need to see what's left of the ranch. I have to assess the damage. I need you to come with me." Jesse's brow furrowed. "You're sure you're up for that? You're not fully recovered." Marissa's eyes flashed with irritation, though she quickly masked it. "I'm not a child. I've been through worse. My family didn't get this far by sitting idle." Jesse didn't argue. He could see that the fire in her wasn't easily extinguished. She had a fire in her, all right, a fire that had been stoked by loss, betrayal, and the fear of losing everything she'd ever known. He stood slowly, crossing the room to join her at the window. The morning light shimmered across the fields, casting a quiet glow over the landscape. For a moment, the two of them stood there in silence, side by side, looking out over the land that Jesse had always known and the land that Marissa was fighting to reclaim. "I know it's dangerous," Marissa said after a long pause, breaking the silence between them. "But I can't let it go. My family built that ranch from nothing. It's everything I have left." Jesse nodded, though his thoughts were heavy. He had his own family to worry about, his son, Tommy, who was still too young to understand the danger of all this. But there was something about Marissa, something about the desperation in her voice that made it hard to turn away. The next morning, they saddled up Dust and Marissa's horse, a sturdy chestnut mare she had managed to keep hidden under blankets, as they prepared to leave. Tommy insisted on accompanying them, though Jesse was reluctant to take him. But the boy had grown curious about the woman they had brought into their home. "You're not staying here by yourself," Tommy said firmly as he grabbed his coat and strapped it over his small shoulders. Jesse's heart softened at the sight of his son's determined face. All right. Just be careful, Tommy. We're not going far." With everything packed, the trio set off toward town. The snow was still thick on the ground, but the roads had cleared enough for travel. It wasn't long before they reached the edge of Red Bluff, a small, isolated settlement on the outskirts of the Walker Ranch. Jesse had been here countless times, but the town felt different today. It wasn't the town that had changed, but him. He wasn't just a quiet cowboy anymore. He was now tethered to something far more dangerous. Marissa's past was beginning to catch up with them. He could feel it. They reached the town square and made their way to the local saloon. The worn wooden building stood like a relic from another time, its windows cracked and covered with the dust of forgotten years. As they entered, the heavy scent of tobacco smoke and cheap whiskey hit Jesse's nose. The few patrons seated at tables didn't seem to notice their arrival. Marissa, however, kept her eyes fixed ahead, scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. "Stay close," she whispered to Jesse as they walked in, her posture stiff, every step measured. She looked every part the woman who once owned the land, but there was a bitterness in her eyes now, a hardness. Jesse followed her to the bar, where a few men glanced up as they approached. A thin man behind the bar wiped a glass with a rag, eyes narrowing when he saw Marissa. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a silent acknowledgement of the trouble she brought with her. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice rough, eyes flicking to Jesse for a brief moment before returning to Marissa. "I'm not here for a drink," Marissa replied coldly. "I'm here for information." The bartender gave her a look, then sighed, setting the rag aside. I figured you'd be back sooner or later. He lowered his voice, leaning in closer. What you're looking for isn't here anymore. Word travels fast, Miss Walker. The land's already been taken. They've been selling off your cattle for months. Marissa's face tightened. Jesse could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't the reunion she had hoped for. She stood taller, but her words were clipped. Who's been selling my cattle? I want names. The bartender hesitated, glancing nervously at the other men in the saloon. He seemed torn, as if afraid to speak, but then reluctantly he gave in. You want trouble, Miss Walker? It's already here. There's not much left of your ranch. It's being run by your cousin, Levi. Jesse's pulse quickened. Levi? Your cousin? Marissa's face went pale, but her voice remained steady, though tight with emotion. He's been trying to take control for years. I should have seen this coming. Jesse stood motionless, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This was bigger than he had anticipated. They weren't just fighting for the ranch. They were fighting against family. The Walker name was being torn apart from the inside, and Marissa had been left to clean up the mess. We need to confront him, Marissa said, her voice hard. I'm not leaving until I get what's mine. Jesse didn't know how to answer. Part of him wanted to protect his family and get back to the safety of their cabin. But another part of him knew that they had crossed a line now, and there was no turning back. This was about more than just Marissa's empire. It was about loyalty, betrayal, and a legacy that had been shattered by greed. The world outside was as cold and unforgiving as ever. The storm had passed, but the aftermath left a blanket of silence that seemed to smother the land, as if everything had been covered in snow and forgotten. Jesse and Marissa stood in front of the old Walker Ranch house, a place that should have been a home, but now felt more like a tomb. The house loomed like a ghost in the past, its windows dark, its doors locked tight. It had been weeks since Marissa had been here, but it felt like a lifetime. Inside, the fire had long since died, and the smell of rotting wood and dust filled the air. Marissa's footsteps echoed in the empty halls as she made her way down the grand staircase, her heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. Jesse followed behind her, his mind working overtime, thinking about Tommy, about their cabin, about everything that could go wrong. I never thought it would end like this, Marissa muttered, her eyes scanning the room, her hands tight at her sides. I thought we were untouchable, but they've taken everything. Jesse didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew what was at stake here. The Walker Ranch wasn't just property. It was history, legacy, a bloodline that stretched back generations. Marissa had spent her entire life building something that now hung by a thread. But Jesse had his own family to think about. He had Tommy, who was waiting back at the cabin, and who had no idea what kind of storm was brewing on the horizon. This is where it ends, Jesse, Marissa said, her voice breaking. I either reclaim what's mine, or I lose it all. My family's name, my father's dream, it'll all be gone. Jesse turned to face her. She looked so small in that moment, so vulnerable, but he knew what she was capable of. She wasn't just a woman. She was a force, driven by loss and by the burning need to survive. I can't help you fight your cousin, Jesse said softly, but his words had weight. Not like this. I've got my family to protect. Marissa turned sharply, her face hardening. You don't get to walk away now. Not after everything. I need you. Her words cut deeper than he expected. Jesse looked at her, torn between the desire to protect his own and the undeniable pull to stand by her side. He didn't know how to reconcile both parts of himself. There was a long silence before he spoke again. I'll help you, Marissa, but this is it. I'm not risking my son's life. Marissa nodded, her lips curling into a tight smile. I don't expect you to. But this fight, it's ours now, and we can't turn back. By the time they reached the barn, the sun had set, casting long shadows over the land. The cold air bit their skin, but Jesse barely noticed. His focus was entirely on what lay ahead. Levi Walker was waiting for them. He stood in front of the barn, his dark figure framed by the pale light of the moon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of arrogance that seemed to surround him like a cloak. There was something cold about him, Something that didn't sit right with Jesse. But he wasn't here to deal with that right now. He was here to protect Marissa. Levi, Marissa called, her voice steady but tight with anger. Levi turned slowly, his lips curling into a smirk when he saw her. Well, look who decided to show up. I was wondering when you'd crawl back. Jesse's grip tightened on the reins of his horse. He could feel the tension between them, the air thick with the years of betrayal and bad blood. But Marissa wasn't backing down. She stepped forward, her boots crunching against the snow, her eyes locked onto Levi. "You've taken everything from me, Levi," Marissa said, her voice cold, but her words sharp. "And I'm done letting you destroy what's left." Levi raised an eyebrow, his smirk never fading. "What's left, Marissa? There's nothing left for you. I've already taken it all. And now it's mine." Jesse stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to gun on his belt. But Marissa stopped him with a glance. "No, Jesse," she said quietly. "This is mine to handle." Levi chuckled, clearly enjoying the tension in the air. "You think you can take it back? You're weak, Marissa. You always were." Marissa's eyes flashed with fire that Jesse had seen before, the kind of fire that came from the deepest well of hurt and rage. "Don't mistake my silence for weakness," she said, her voice cold and steady. "I'll take back what's mine, one way or another." Before anyone could react, Marissa pulled out a revolver from beneath her coat, her aim steady. Levi's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained his composure. He wasn't about to let her take back what he'd stolen so easily. The standoff that followed was tense, the silence broken only by the creaking of the barn and the whistle of the wind. Levi's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't make a move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, Levi drew his gun, the sound of the hammer clicking back echoing in the cold night air. But Marissa was faster. She fired first, the shot ringing out like thunder across the silent fields. The bullet struck Levi in the shoulder, sending him stumbling back. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he staggered to his feet, his own gun raised, aiming directly at Marissa. "Enough of this," he growled. "You're not getting away with this." Jesse didn't hesitate. He drew his own gun and fired, his shot grazing Levi's arm and knocking his weapon from his hand. The fight was over before it could truly begin. Levi, now disarmed and wounded, collapsed to the ground. His breathing was labored, his face twisted in a mix of pain and disbelief. Marissa approached him, her step slow, her expression unreadable. "You should have known better than to betray me," she said, her voice cold, devoid of any sympathy. "But you'll pay for what you've done." Jesse stood behind her, watching the final confrontation unfold. He didn't need to say anything. The words had already been spoken. Levi, defeated and broken, looked up at her with hatred in his eyes. "You won't win, Marissa. You'll never be the same." Marissa's lips tightened into a thin line. "I already have." The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon when Jesse, Marissa, and Tommy rode back to the cabin. The world felt different now. The tension lifted, the weight of betrayal and loss finally behind them. Jesse could feel the shift in the air, the quiet promise of a new beginning. Marissa had reclaimed what was hers, but it had come at a cost. As they rode together, side by side, Jesse couldn't help but feel that something had changed in him, too. He had stepped into a world of danger and deception, but in the end, it was his own values, his own loyalty to family, that had made the difference. Marissa turned to him as they neared the cabin, her eyes soft but determined. "Thank you, Jesse, for everything." Jesse nodded, his hand resting on Tommy's shoulder. "We did this together." They rode on, the world ahead of them still wild and uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, Jesse felt at peace. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to fight for,